All right, Musketeer Report Podcast. It is August 16th, and we're at a bit of a lull in the summer here. Doing this podcast, I'm going to have a special guest on later, Zach Braziller from the New York Post, to talk about St. John's. If you're subscribed to Musketeer Report, or even if you're not, these articles are free right now. I've been doing Big East team previews, just started that the last few days. So St. John's is already up. Creighton is already up. This podcast will serve as an accompaniment to that written piece and get a little more insight from someone who covers the team, get their takes on how St. John's is going to look or how their offseason looked here throughout the spring and summer. I mentioned, though, a little bit of a lull in the summer right now from a Xavier perspective. The players are currently on break before the start of school. It's been the last week or two here that after they finished up summer workouts, they all got to go home for a little bit, and then they are gearing up for the start of school this upcoming week. There's also been a recruiting dead period over the last 2 or 3 weeks here. Started on August 6th. And it ends in a couple of days here on August 20th. And what that means is that coaches aren't allowed to go out and visit recruits in their homes. Recruits aren't allowed on college campuses. Coaches aren't allowed to evaluate them playing or go to their open gyms or anything like that. So they can still talk and text, but that's definitely slowed things down a bit as well in terms of the recruiting information that's been coming out. And then just in general, from a Xavier perspective, it's been a little bit quieter this year than I think it typically is in August. And I think that's partly because Xavier is only really looking for 1 or 2 recruits this cycle. I think that's for a couple of reasons, but one of them is just that the transfer portal has definitely changed the way things work in college basketball recruiting, and it's changed what emphasis you put on high school recruits. But I also think for Xavier, it's a little bit different in the sense that I think they're really confident about the season that they're going to have and the roster that they've put into place. And so, one, they want to be selective because they only want to add players that they feel like are going to enhance that roster. And 2, I think if they have the type of season that they think they're capable of having this year, they're probably going to be an even more attractive place next spring for transfer portal guys to recruit, or even in the spring and summer with other high school prospects. So I think that's part of why they might want to go a little bit lighter this year. Again, they did some work at the end of the transfer portal. Ryan Conwell is a multi-year guy. They added Roddy Anderson. They added Cam Fletcher, guys that were more focused on a multi-year approach into next season, not only focused on the upcoming year. So that's partly why they're going to be a little bit light on this high school recruiting class, only looking for 1 or maybe 2 guys. Now, again, do they have enough room to take a third potentially if things really fell their way, or there was another international guy that they wanted to go out and grab? Sure, they have the room to do so. But right now, I think the goal is to only recruit 1 or 2 high school prospects this cycle. In terms of those names, of course, go to musketeerreport.com. We've been talking about them in more detail there. I've had updates pretty much every week on what the latest buzz is about the top targets. But the main name to watch right now is Nick Lewis, the point guard out of the DMV area. We've been talking about him on this show and, of course, on Musketeer Report, the website and the message board a lot over the last few months. And he remains, I would say, the top target from a Xavier perspective. And I think Xavier is still in a good position with him. He took his Michigan visit a few weeks ago. I think some people were worried about that, and rightfully so. And I think Michigan is definitely in the mix here. I would also put LSU towards the top of that recruitment along with Xavier, but nothing happened in terms of him turning around and wanting to make an immediate commitment or anything like that for Michigan. So I think those 3 schools are still in a good spot. I continue to hear good things about Xavier. And now the next piece we're waiting for is him to potentially make that Creighton visit later this month or early September. Still haven't heard final word on that. So we'll see where that goes. But that's kind of the latest on Nick Lewis, and the guy that you should probably be keeping a closest watch on if you're a Xavier fan trying to follow the recruiting. There are a few other names that we're talking about at Musketeer Report. I think one thing to keep in mind here is that there's sort of almost 2 sets of recruits. There's like the guys that you think, and Sean Miller has talked about this, the guys that you think are going to make an instant impact and can help you right away. And those are the type of guys that you're probably sort of thinking in line with the transfer portal, and you're thinking transfer portal targets that you might be looking for next spring or that you just recruited, and what you're paying them in NIL money. That's going to be a little bit different. And then there are also other high school prospects they're looking for that might be more stash and redshirt developmental type recruits. And so I think that's something to keep in mind here as you see different guys where it's like, well, this guy has a lot of high major offers and it's really competitive recruitment, but they're also interested in this other guy who it seems like it's more of a mid-major recruitment. That's probably typically what's going on there, is that they might be looking with that other guy to get him on a cheaper NIL deal there, stash him for a year, develop him, and then maybe really have something to work with a couple years from now. So that's something to keep in mind here as you watch what's unfolding during the next month or so in recruiting and commitments and guys making visits and all of that. Now, as I mentioned, there have been Big East team previews up on the site over the last week. I did St. John's first, then Creighton. I think St. John's to me is a team that is going to be in the top half of the conference. I think they're probably somewhere between third and fifth. I think Xavier is also going to be in that mix. Creighton is a team that I would put second going into the preseason, but I think they're a legit contender for UConn and to win the Big East outright in the regular season this year. So both of those were two interesting teams to start with. Hope you guys are enjoying these. Feel free to give me any feedback on the message board of things you'd like to see included in there, or if those are valuable content for you guys. But without further ado, let's get into our interview with Zach Braziller of the New York Post, talking about this St. John's team. Zach Braziller from the New York Post joins us now to talk about St. John's. And Zach, thank you for doing this. First of all, we'll jump right into it here. Last year, St. John's finished fifth in the Big East. They were 11-9 overall. They missed the NCAA tournament. They lose Joel Soriano, Dennis Jenkins, along with a few other significant contributors. They had a major overhaul in the transfer portal that we'll go through here in a little bit. But just big picture, do you think this team is better, worse, or about the same as they were a season ago?
No, I think they're better. I think they're much more athletic. They're deeper. That there are some concerns. Shooting, I think is probably number one. There are obviously some question marks up front, but look, they go out and they land two of the best lead guards in the portal, Kadar Richmond and Devon Smith. Two guys who, probably you can make an argument Kadar definitely is a top 10 player in the Big East on paper, and you can make the argument Devon Smith is too. He was absolutely phenomenal for Utah last year, and I think he fits Patino perfectly. Look, there's some question, up front. I mentioned question marks. They lose Soriano, but really from January on, I thought Zuby Ejiofor was their best big man. They bring in Vince Iwuchukwu. I'm sure I botched his last name, from USC, a 7'1" guy who was a big recruit, didn't really play well at USC, had some health issues, and then they go out and get a guy people think is a pro prospect from overseas in Ruben Prey. They also go out and they got Aaron Scott from North Texas, who I know they're really high on, a 3-and-D wing who can also play the 4. So, I think they had a very good offseason. Like I mentioned, there are some concerns shooting-wise. And, there aren't as, the backcourt I think you're much more certain about than the front court. But, I think this is a team. I think this team is better. I don't think there's any question about that.
Yeah. You mentioned Kadar Richmond, who is one of the biggest transfer portal gets in the country, and then Devon Smith from Utah is another really talented guard. When you look at the pairing of those two, that's a unique group. Devon's a little bit smaller, super dynamic. Kadari's this big jumbo ball handler, playmaker. That's like is he a point guard or is he something else, just a hybrid guy? What really stands out to you about those two and how they might work together?
Yeah, I think that's obviously a big question. Patino has said a bunch of times he's really not worried that he's had two kind of ball dominant guards in the past, pointed to Peyton Siva and Russ Smith when they won a title at Louisville. But yeah, no, it's going to definitely be interesting. And then you throw in Simeon Wiltshire into that mix, who was a big, a top 30 freshman recruit, didn't play a ton as a freshman. A lot of that was because Dennis Jenkins was so good, but they're really high on him. he really came along well late in the year. They're going to look for him to be to be a scorer. He can really shoot. I think that those three guys are going to play a ton together, and it's going to be really interesting. But yeah, look, Devon Smith's a guy who, he's super athletic. He's kind of a one-man fast break. He's a really good rebounder for his size at 6 feet. And then Kadar is kind of more, he plays in the post. He's not necessarily a guy who's going to be, getting the ball up and down as much. So it's going to be definitely interesting to kind of see how they fit with each other.
Before we go any farther with some of these questions, what would be your starting five as it sits here right now for the St. John's team?
I think you're looking at Kadarian Smith, Aaron Scott, RJ Lewis, and Zuby Ejiofor. Luis is a guy who's got a ton of talent. His first year, he was a UMass transfer. His first year last year with St. John's was a little fractured because he dealt with a ton of injury issues. He really wasn't able to practice much. He had a stress reaction in one of his shins. He went and he had surgery on both shins, and he's got a ton of talent, man. Like, I know there are people who think he can potentially play in the NBA. 6'7". He's super athletic. He's stronger than he looks. If I had to predict a guy who's going to lead them in scoring, it might be him. And I think you're looking at Wilcher as a sixth man. Another Brady Dunlap, a freshman's a guy they're going to really count on. He can really shoot the ball. So you have those guys, and obviously we mentioned some of the big guys who are going to factor in as well off the bench. But yeah, those would probably be my five. I wouldn't dismiss the idea of potentially Aaron Scott off the bench with Wilcher starting as well. But I think right now you're probably looking at Wilcher as your sixth man.
So it's interesting. That's kind of exactly where I wanted to go with this is when I look at that lineup, you had the same exact starting five that I had when I did my preview earlier this week. And the one question I had was, do you have to find a way to get Wilcher on the court for the 3-point shooting aspect of it? How do you feel like they can get by with the shooting? Is like Aaron Scott the sort of the shooter in this lineup right now?
Yeah, look, Aaron Scott is, I definitely think they believe RJ Lewis is a much better shooter than he showed last year, being healthy, be able to practice and do those player development sessions with Patino, they believe will help. I mean, Zuby Ejiofor is a guy that they think can even hit some threes. Look, I know it wasn't a ton of attempts, but Devon Smith did hit 40% from three. They think that Kadar Richmond, where he's not going to have to do everything, where he's going to get more catch and shoot opportunities, can be a little better. But yeah, look, they're going to need Wilcher going to play a lot. I think you're going to see Dunlap play a lot. Freshman top 50 guy Jaden Glover, probably be their fourth guard, is a guy who can shoot the ball, and he's going to have to make some shots because teams are going to play off him. Now, if they're going to defend as well as I think they can, and they're going to live in transition, that shooting isn't going to be nearly as much of an issue because Smith and Kadari are impossible to stay in front of. These are guys who are going to live in the paint, and when they're in transition, they're really, really tough to stop. But yeah, no, I don't think there's any doubt. That's probably the biggest question is, can they hit enough shots from the perimeter?
Last year, you look at this team, really the last couple of years, Soriano inside, such a physical presence on the glass, especially, and you had to account for him on the offensive end because he was going to score down there. Looking at this team, obviously Luis and Scott are both more sort of hybrid, like wing forward type guys a little bit. Ejiofor, 6'9", 235, pretty big body. Vincent Iwuchukwu, who they brought over from USC, is 7 foot, thinner, a little bit more raw. How do you see the front court playing out? You seem pretty high on Ejiofor. I came into this from the perspective of I'm not really sure what they're going to do in the post, and I'm not sure if they have a true Big East post presence. What is your takeaway on that?
Yeah, look, I think you're going to see a ton of lineups with Scott or RJ at Luis at the 4. I am very high on Zuby. He's a guy who plays with an incredible motor. He really rebounds. He's tough. He's not I don't see them. he necessarily being a big pros presence, but that's where Kadar is so valuable. Kadar is a guy who you could throw in the post. And I think there are going to be times where they're going to play 5 out, and they think Zuby can do that. So I think that's also, a factor you have to watch. But yeah, look, they're not going to have that post guy that they're just going to dump the ball down to for the most part. I mean, if there is one, it's Kadar. We saw at Seton Hall how tough he is to deal with in the post because of his size, because of his passing. But yeah, no, there's no question. I don't think they have like a center. They're just going to say, we're going to throw the ball to him and see what he can do.
Then you've talked about Wilcher a little bit already. Are there any other bench pieces that you're really interested in, or you think might be flying under the radar that might stand out when the season gets going here?
I mean, look, the international guy, Ruben Prey, people think he's a pro prospect down the road. He runs like a deer. He's 6'10". He has some skill. Not a great shooter, but he has some skill. He can put the ball on the floor. He's played professionally, overseas here for a few years. I mean, he's very intriguing. There's no doubt about that. I know NBA people think he's got a shot in a year or two down the road to be drafted. So, I mean, he's, obviously he's very interesting. I mentioned Glover, who's a top 50 guy who's really talented. So, yeah, I mean, look, they're going to play 10 guys, maybe even 11. They're going to play a ton of guys. They're going to get up and down. They're going to play super fast. That's the one big thing I've heard from workouts is just the athleticism and what they're able to do at pace is just very different from last year.
So that's really interesting. You mentioned them playing 10 or 11 guys. Because when I looked at it, I was like, okay, I feel pretty good about at least 4 guys here. Like, you're high on Zuby. I didn't know as much about him, so I'm questioning him a little bit more. But even you throw in here, that's 5. And then, okay, Wilcher, but like, I didn't know much about that. So you saying they're 10 or 11 deep, and even reading some of Rick Pitino's comments that I've seen from summer workouts where he says this group's much deeper, much more what I'm used to in terms of athleticism was interesting to me. You really feel like the depth is not a concern at all for this team from what I'm gathering. Is that right?
No. I mean, so like I mentioned the top 5, then you have, let's say you have Wilcher as your 6th man. Dunlap's a guy who had some big moments as a freshman. He's a really good shooter. He's gotten stronger, which was an area of need there for him. So he's 7. Then you have the 2 other big guys. You have Glover. And look, that takes you to 10. I think they're gonna play 10 a ton.
Is there another concern that you see that stands out aside from the 3-point shooting that we mentioned?
I'd say the 3-point shooting, and then just a question mark in the middle. They need, whether it's Prey, whether it's Zuby, whether it's Vince, they need those guys to produce for them. And I think one area they're actually going to be better at is rim protection, because that was an area Soriano struggled with from January on last year. Zuby really defends. Vince really can defend. Prey's a guy who blocks shots. I think the center question is a question mark, because as much as I do like Zuby, he played limited minutes last year, and he's going to need to play more, and they're going to need him to be consistent for them.
When you talk about the Big East, after like the first, you got a team or 2 at the top, a team or 2 at the bottom, and then everyone's so closely jumbled up there in the midst of the conference, and especially playing the home and home double round robin, it's always tough to get a lot of separation. So it's kind of sometimes silly to ask preseason about like where a team stacks up in the pecking order. But my takeaway looking at St. John's after running through the roster was, I don't think they're first or second. I would reserve those spots for UConn and Creighton, but like 3rd through 5th, I think they're somewhere in there. What would be your preseason prognostication where you think they'll finish up?
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I think you could group them with Marquette, group them with Xavier, maybe Providence, although I'm not quite sure Providence is quite in that 3 to 5 mix. But yeah, look, I think they could finish anywhere from like 3 to 6, 3 to 5. I think that's completely fair. I mean, there are question marks. There's no doubt about that. But yeah, I think they have a very talented team. I think they have a team that kind of fits how Patino wants to play better. I think it's going to be a very exciting season for them. Patino feels much more certain of this group. I think he knows the league better. knows what it's going to take. And yeah, I mean, I think they're going to be pretty good.
What's your last thought here? What's your read on Patino? Is he loving it? Like, he seems reinvigorated to me. He seems like he's really enjoying this offseason. Even doesn't seem all that bothered even by the portal stuff, maybe. Like, what's your read? Is he going to keep doing this for a long time or what?
Yeah, I don't know about a long time, but yeah, I think 4 years definitely is, I can see maybe a fifth. Yeah, I mean, look, he gets to live in New York. He gets to be around his family, gets to coach at the Garden, gets to coach in the Big East. Yeah, I mean, I do think he's very into this, and I think how last season ended really bothered him, because I do think he felt he had a team that could win a game or two in the tournament, and it just took them a little too long to get going, you know. And now here they are, you know, probably with a roster that better suits him, and he thinks he's got multiple pros on this team. So yeah, I think they could be very good.
Zach, really appreciate you taking the time out to talk some St. John's basketball here in August. Everyone can find your work at Twitter. Is probably the best spot to do that. You do a great job covering the team. Anything that I missed on St. John's or that you want to promote or anything like that?
I think you're all good.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it, Zach.
All right, man. Have a good one, Rick.
You too. Take care.
All right.
All right. Really appreciate Zach joining us on the podcast today. Also appreciate all of you guys listening and joining us on the message board at musketeerreport.com. That's where the conversation will continue. If you're not a subscriber at musketeerreport.com and you are a real Xavier fan, what are you doing? You got to sign up. That's where all the top Xavier fans are, talking Xavier hoops year round. You're really missing out this time of year. If you're getting that itch and you're like, man, I can't believe it's still the off season. I can't wait to get back in the gym. Sign up for Musketeer Report. That's a good place to scratch that itch and join the other Xavier fans talking XU hoops all the time, 24/7. So find us over at Musketeer Report, and we'll talk to you on there or on the next podcast. Thanks, guys.